Good afternoon, everyone. Professor Deepak, that was absolutely fascinating. We should have had you back on this panel. Yeah, we'd love you to participate in this conversation. Very warm welcome. Thank you, panelists. And I think that this group actually is very eclectic, but also very wholesome. So before I begin, I'd love for each of you to probably introduce yourselves, what you do, what the whole purpose and mission is, and then we can get into the conversation.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Shiva Subramanian, and I am the CIO of Biopeak. And what we want to do with Biopeak is basically what Professor Saini was just talking about, right? I mean, it's about the convergence of health, where all the elements of health, all the elements of longevity, health span, are all available under one roof, where we're able to predict and personalize and also to take care of every element in a very individual way, right? Because we're completely unique, even though our genetics are so similar. And our job was to be able to cater for each person and actually have a location that will do that for you with a multidisciplinary team. And especially working on Indian data, on South Asian data, because that's what we're lacking today, right? And as Professor Saini said, we don't have enough of data in India. So we are in that continuum of care where we have to not only create the data, but also apply it at the same time. Otherwise, the lag will become the next 20 years, which we don't have. So that is the function and the future of what Biopeaks would like to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Shiva.
I think we've been hearing a lot about technology today morning, and I represent a sector which goes back millennia, and I represent Apollo Ayurveda Hospitals. We've been around 20 years, part of Apollo Hospitals Group the last 2.5 years. But over the last 20 years, we've been singularly focused on mainstreaming Ayurveda, the mother system of medicine of the country, mother system of medicine of the world. And as we look at fads and we look at technology trends and as we look at things which come up and down, what we realize is that India can lead in the 21st century, right? And it's not that technology is going to solve mankind's health problems in entirety. Times have changed, but the human being has essentially remained the same, right? Environment has changed. The human being's response to environmental changes still remains limited to a few ways in which the body can express, the body and the mind can express. So what has been very fascinating for Apollo Ayurveda is this journey into, I'll talk about some of those tenets of what we try to do, but how we look at chronic disease care, we look at life cycle health management. I'll talk about these things, but quickly, integrative medicine, which we believe is bringing the best of more than one system. And there's an India, Bharat definition of integrative medicine, which I think is very relevant when you look at these subjects. But quickly, I just want to tell, when you look at access, innovation, impact, which is the theme for today, where Ayurveda can really play a role in addressing these 3 points. Thank you very much for having me here.
Yeah, so I represent an organization called Dementia India Alliance. I think we just heard a lot of talk about longevity. We also spoke about how one can age healthy. One of the things that we are focusing on is neurodegenerative conditions. Much of them has become a reality, part of our society today. And I come from an organization which advocates for the cause of neurodegeneration. So we work around how can we identify cognitive impairment among people early, and how do we ensure that people have access to care when we talk about neurodegenerative conditions such as Alzheimer's, vascular, and many other conditions as well. We work with the government at policy level on how we can have policies for people who have neurodegenerative conditions, as we are talking about access to healthcare, equitable access in rural and urban areas. I think mental health, especially mental health in the elderly, is a very much a stigmatizing topic, and also access to healthcare is highly questionable. So our idea here is to how we make these gaps accessible, and how do we ensure that people have access to dementia care, how people have awareness to healthy aging. I think when we talk about longevity, it's not just about healthy body, it's also about healthy mind. So we're working in that space. So lovely to be here.
Wonderful, thank you. Just from my side, I am here in the capacity of being part of TIE. So I'm on the board of TIE Global. That's something I've been pursuing for more than a decade now. And on my day and most of the nights now, I'm trying to build out one of India's first cell and gene therapy platforms, and we are trying to disrupt the cost and scale for bringing in therapies for blood cancers and hopefully other solid tumors, which is Immunil. So now you would realize why I was saying why this panel is so wholesome, because we've got Shiva, who's trying to make all of us limitless, and we've got Rajiv, who's trying to blend in ages-old Ayurveda and into integrated medicine, which most of the West is talking about. And Ramani is trying to solve for something which we don't know how many of us will be hit by down the road, and there is not much happening there. Rajiv, let me start with you. You mentioned that the platform that you run, operate, and own is very invested in by Apollo Group, right? Now, Apollo is a very large chain of hospitals. How does this coexist with what you're trying to do?
This seems to be one of the primary questions that come to mind when you look at the two names together. But what we have to look at is health needs is not just to be defined in terms of a diagnosis. We have to look at stages of disease, stages of life. So for example, there was a mention in between about neonatal mortality, right? There was a mention by Vijay Rajan, I think, in his speech about how technology helps there. But if you look at neonatal mortality, how do you look at the health of an expectant mother, right? How do you begin from the moment of conception so that the conception through the 3 trimesters leads to a healthy progeny and maximizing the health potential? Ayurveda comes there. So what I want to tell, when you look at the outcome in terms of neonatal mortality or maternal mortality, it is a very reactive or maybe contemporary thing you do at that time, but how do you begin first? So why I'm bringing this up, when you look at life cycle health management, which is actually the holy grail of healthcare, not transactional episodic management, you look at a person from conception to grave or to cremation ground, that's where a whole person systems view of health really comes to bear upon the problem. And I want to stress this thing, we are so used to with our engineering minds, and many doctors also have inherited that engineering mind, which is a simple single cause, single effect type of disease paradigm. A pathogen-led paradigm. We talk in terms of microbes and viruses and pathogens from outside. As we go beyond that and look at the host and say, how do we look at whole person health, right? What leads to this person? I mean, we know there are trillions of microbes in our, trillions of different types of microbes in my body. A dengue mosquito will come and infect 5 of us or 4 of us. 1 of us will succumb to the thing. We call it immunity. Immunity is not the presence of some, chemicals here or some zinc and magnesium or some parameters. What makes me, more vulnerable to that or the other? So these type of questions, I think, have been totally glossed over. Today, we have got into a pathogen-led thing. When you look at longevity, and I want to say, we talked about Ayushman Bharat, Ayurveda, Veda stands for knowledge. Ayu is not just longevity. Ayu is more than longevity. It is self-actualization in physical, mental, spiritual dimensions. And why I bring this up, these are paradigms that India needs to bring back to the world. The connection between the body, mind, spirit. So now going back to the Apollo question, Apollo is by far the biggest integrated health enterprise when you look at tertiary, acute emergency care, but also gone into diagnostics, into ProHealth, which is the world, India's largest preventive health checkup model. But when you look at the fact, secondary prevention, I want to bring in one very important point here. Going beyond primary, secondary, tertiary, quaternary care, can we look at primal prevention or primordial prevention, primary prevention, secondary prevention, tertiary prevention, quaternary prevention? Totally alter the paradigm. The primary, secondary, tertiary healthcare is totally about, in my language, ways to cut open people or to intervene, strong interventions. When I look at from the preventive lens, that's the consumer lens. How do I look at, as I told, the health of an expectant mother, child yet to be born, and today particularly with late pregnancies, complex pregnancies, you have a situation where preventive begins there. Leave out primary prevention, secondary prevention. I want to touch this part. Nipping in the bud, early stage diseases like blood pressure, diabetes, arthritis, so all the chronic diseases that you talk about. Have you asked a question, why is there a term called chronic disease? It is because we treat the symptom of the disease, not the root cause. And the disease subsists for years. Ayurveda has got a huge role to play there in treating the root cause. And how does it do that? And it is not Dadi ke nuske, if by chance anybody thinks it is that. It's a complete knowledge system. So what we do, we complement Apollo hospitals across the life cycle, and we do step-down care, stroke patients, cancer rehabilitation, cardiac rehabilitation, take people with chronic kidney disease before they go for transplants, reduce the number of dialysis cycles, perhaps obviate the need for transplants. So, and then the most important area, pediatric developmental disorders to neurodegenerative disorders. Ayurveda perhaps has something that the world really needs. Cerebral palsy, autism spectrum disorders, Alzheimer's, these entire area of diseases where robotics cannot do something. That's where Ayurveda can play. Thank you.
Thank you, Rajiv. I'll come back to you. Shiva, in Professor Deepak mentioned rapamycin. And between the world of David Sinclair and Brian Johnson, we have Biopeak in India, right? To me, and having also dabbed into this a little bit and personally having tried almost 200 odd different supplements, I came to the conclusion that a lot of it is a fad, and there are some very simple things that you need to do. How are you building out Biopeak in the context of what India needs?
It's a great question. Let me start by this. I think the empowerment of an individual comes from making what's invisible visible, right? And today we are so information driven. And if you think about what Biopics actually does, is that unravels that story personally for you. From a cell, going into a tissue, into an organ, into a system, and then how that system fits into the environment, right? And how can we do that is the actual fundamental question. And then we can go back and say, I can apply any principle on top of that. And we are very fiercely supportive of our own tradition. Now, here's what's amazing about what this whole longevity in India is about. It's very inclusive. Dr. Saini is actually also our CSO in our company. And the reason I bring this up is very interesting, right? If they are discovering, we are applying. And the framework remains the same because the framework is saying, what do I personally, if you look at it, personally, this is how my body works. If I put this, what happens to me? And this is what's not transparent, right? Because what we're now doing is we're getting second, third-hand information. NAD, rapamycin. You're reading something and you assume that it's applicable to you, right? And isn't that basically the exact opposite of personalization? So the first thing I think is that we're making visible to the person or the individual how their own body works. And that neurocognitively is one of the greatest empowerments that you can actually enable because you're saying, I understand this does not work. I'm aware of it, right? And how do we bring in things like wearables? How do you bring things like that? How do you make it applicable so you're able to see the change in data? And because of our engineering mindset today and our lack of trust in systems, if you're actually able to visualize that change, then you build trust. And actually what I would say is that we are building a convergent, trust-based system, right? Where we can include all these elements, and I think that is where we're heading with Biopic. It has to be local, applicable, and personalized, right? And predictive because you are able to visualize, see, and change.
Shiva, to the two more questions on this. To the common person, what has been, in your experience, some of the biggest realizations of what the needle movers are? And my perception, at least, is that longevity is becoming some kind of a luxury good in the way people are looking at it. Is your vision to democratize this, or are you creating something for, quote unquote, the healthy elite?
Absolutely not. I think everything that we do is to be able to democratize it. But as Professor Saini was saying, we actually have no data. So I think the most important part of that is that at this stage it becomes affordable to a select few because we're trying to bring in this framework, right? Ultimately, when you have enough of data and you have the ability for the data to be tested on a platform, then you can take it, to the masses. But let's put it like this, right? The way I look at it, even if you take a simple metabolite test, I mean, it gives you thousands and thousands of data pieces. But what does that mean to me? And I think that's what we're missing, right? Because one is a discovery module, and the other one is to say, all this data is there, how is it relevant to me? And I think as the world is moving forward, you'll realize with a drop of blood, we're able to do more than we've ever been able to do. With a urine sample, you're able to do millions of things we were never able to do. So actually, I think this is what I meant by the convergence. As we're able to bring all these data points together, a small drop of blood should be able to give you longevity, right? I mean, technically, that is the dream, right?
Yeah. And what's been some of the biggest findings so far on what moves the needle, in your view?
Actually, I think it's going back to the root cause analysis. I think what we're finding is that for every person, it is something slightly different. It's where they're from. And more, it looks like it is the exposome that you really have to control, because I think the abuse of the environment and the benefits, and there are other things that are happening to our body and our genetics and our epigenetics because of the exposome. I think if you're able to change the exposome, even in what food you consume and how you consume, you're probably going to get a greater impact on than anything else, right? And I think that is what the kind of, the simple things that you can actually change. And finally, it doesn't cost in terms of supplements and rapamycin. It's the foundational first principles.
The issue always is if you tell that to someone, they feel they haven't given you a prescription that really works.
And that's why I think the data is so sacrosanct, right? Because when you're able to give each person a particular kind of modus operandi that's able to change that data, then the value is in the expertise.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's irrelevant. And I think that's where the data keeps us accountable and whoever you're treating accountable, right? And that's why we have to be an outcome-driven system, I feel.
Right. On exosomes and the environment, Ramani, you obviously are looking at dementia across the country, right? Is there a certain pattern you're seeing in demographic, lifestyle that is emerging?
Yeah, so that's a very interesting question. And as everybody was talking about longevity and aging, it just got me thinking that when it comes to dementia, age is the highest risk factor for dementia. So as you age, we are more and more prone to dementia. And unfortunately, as everybody was talking about lack of data and things like that, if you look at dementia in India, the only relevant data that we have is from the LACIDAT study, which happened a couple of years ago. And it said that in India, perhaps prevalence is somewhere around 7.4% in people above the age of 60 across the country. And then it gave us some statewide estimates about different states. But then when we really go out to the community and do screening, study healthcare systems, we actually find out that the prevalence is much, much lesser. So we're not seeing people with dementia really coming and accessing healthcare. They're out there in the community. So there are challenges in really picking up the number of people with dementia at the community level. That's definitely a challenge. And of course, situation is much better in the urban regions of the country because awareness is much better. But in rural regions of the country, it's really challenging. With respect to the external environmental factors and what really affects your brain health, I think, again, Lancet released recently a paper which talks about the 14 risk factors that can actually affect your brain health and contribute to the neurodegenerative conditions. And it's pretty much same as any longevity risk factors would be. Whatever is good for your heart is good for your brain. And it has listed 14 risk factors. And that most interestingly, they've also added things like hearing impairment, visual impairment, depression, social isolation, air pollution, and of course the regular of diabetes, hypertension, midlife obesity, etc. But what we have to understand is if you study in India, especially with respect to aging population, hearing impairment is again a region of stigma. We are okay to wear a visual aid, but when it comes to a hearing aid, there is a lot of stigma. I've just came out of a very large community screening, and I spoke to elderly whom I was screening. I asked them, have you got yourself screened for hearing impairment? And they say, I hear fine. And this is the answer I usually get when I go for cognitive screening. When I would say, I would want to screen you for your cognition, they would say, I think fine, I can remember everything, I don't want to get screened. So when we are talking about longevity or blood test or things like that, one of the things that we always talk about is all of us are very much interested in getting our yearly blood test done to understand if everything is fine with our body, though that's not the way how you should read your blood test. It's alarming that people don't want to get cognitive screening done to ensure that their brain health is fine. So that's where you have to start the dialogue from.
What fascinates me, and unless I am not aware, is there are very few entrepreneurs who are actually looking at solving this problem. Is that true? And if so, what is the reason?
Yes, that's true. There are very few people who are trying to solve this problem. And I think one of the reasons could be, which I have faced in my career is, for example, we work in trying to identify cognitive impairment early. I have been part of a memory clinic for more than 14 years, and most of the people with dementia come to us in the moderate stages. We would have loved for them to come to us in the milder stages, wherein it is just pushed as the part of normal aging. And there is so much less that you can do when people come into the moderate stages. Families have to face a lot of physical, emotional, and financial exhaustion in looking after somebody with dementia.
Spoke about. We did a 20,000 patient study, and when you looked at the data from that, and this word well-being is used fairly wellness, well-being, these words are used. So Ayurveda goes back 2,700, 800 years back, and it defines it. I'll put it into English from the shloka. Good sleep, good appetite, good metabolism, good excretion, solid liquid, calm state of mind, clear sensory organs. This is how it says. Samadosha Agnisha Samadhatu Malakriya Prasanna Atma Indriya Manaha. Such a person is healthy. Why I bring it up? These 20,000 patients we covered, 49% had anxiety, had depressive tendencies. 44% reported anxiety. 42% had sleep difficulty. You look at metabolic issues, 34%. And then excretory issues, again in the 30s. And the important part, 2/3 had 3 or more out of these 6 issues. 82% had 2 or more of these issues. So when we talk about disease and well-being, we have to understand who is likely to go towards disease. And when we talk about taking a healthy sample, Professor Saini, the point we have to understand, right from birth, the process of degeneration begins. You talked about David Sinclair's study. 2022 Cell magazine, the fact that epigenetic changes are reversible. But he talks about a fancy diet, again a faddish diet. Our proposition is that if you look at aging per se as entropy in the system, reversible through Ayurveda in a personalized way. And I hope that in time to come, we will be able to demonstrate. The word geriatric itself comes from Jara, which is Sanskrit for elderly. So this whole process of anti-aging. So why I'm bringing it up, when you look at whole person health, as opposed to a single disease, take dementia, take this, 10 years before a person develops Parkinsonism, Ayurveda will be able to tell this person is in line to develop one of those neurodegenerative conditions. Take, for example, I just want to take a point you talked about fasting, right, on this thing. Now, this one-size-fits-all approach to health is very dangerous, okay? Because a person who should not fast, he'll accelerate aging. Whereas a healthy body mass index, as you age, you're likely to lose body mass. So Ayurveda says the healthiest person is not a thin person, is a person with a good, healthy body fat index and who does things in balance, eats everything. Just the contrary to what modern medicine would say. But for a obese person who needs to do, to correct that, Langhana therapy is told centuries back. So the thing of personalized medicine, Ayurveda would bring to things. And India can really leverage this in each of these fields.
Rajiv, on Ayurveda, and if I look at what's happened on the allopathic side of medicine, there's been a lot of data generation. It's almost a data glut, right? And sometimes there is data to prove something that you want to prove, right? Ayurveda has had data, but it's been very silent on that front, right? If I compare, because I come from the pharma side of the data world, having been part of one of the largest data companies for a long time. Now, how has the needle moved on that? That was my first question. And the second question is, because there are so many entrepreneurs and founders, and on models for Ayurveda for entrepreneurs, and if I break that down between treatment, diagnosis, the whole integrative medicine part of it, and then products, where do you see opportunities for people to come in and start building out?
So I think the real blue ocean opportunity in healthcare data lies in Ayurveda. And the reason for that, whole person data. Proof of the pudding, go into modern healthcare data and see what has really come out. Where is AI really being used? You have silos of data. When I say silos, not just in terms of hospitals keeping the data, but the fact that I may have imaging data which is there. But if I look at whole person data and look over a period of time, right, longitudinal data, Ayurveda affords a very powerful data structure. So much so that when you're talking about digital twins, without naming the leading cancer institute in the USA who's building out digital twins, they're talking to Apollo Ayurveda because the data that we collect as part of our healthcare process is very rich. So for a potential healthcare entrepreneur, what Ayurveda does is fill in the gaps. You may have disease data, you may have diagnostics, but you won't have the rest of the rich tapestry that contributes to what really makes a person healthy or unhealthy, right? So when you go to patient history and proof of the pudding, and I put it as an open challenge, the data that we collect today is far, far richer and more voluminous in content than what would be collected almost anywhere in the world.
So
it's very comprehensive. Just one last point, that this whole person data as we collected, the way to work out by specialty, by age group, by gender, by clusters of disease. And the key part here, look at whole person health and disease, multimorbidity. You will not find many research papers on that, and probably other doctors, Professor Saini can talk about it. There's by disease data. On dementia, you'll get a paper, but you look at dementia with 3 other diseases, you will not get data, because data is collected in absolute disease-wise values. I think Ayurveda gives us an opportunity to think about whole person health and data on that angle.
Yeah, absolutely, sure.
So I think that's exactly the pursuit that we are embarking on. Because, by the way, we do have a neurocognitive battery that we run. And we also look at it from imaging, so we're also looking at it MRI. And just to respond, we actually are trying to do the longitudinal version of it with imaging data, with lifestyle data, because I think that is also the need of the hour. I think spot right. And I just wanted to say that you can't look at longevity in isolation. You have to look at it as a multi-system, agenda. And I think that is exactly the journey that we are embarking on.
Shiva, a follow on. Just before I move to Rajiv. Shiva, on data, and I've seen there is an entire move towards wearables, right? So there's a lot of personal data that people are now trying to pull out and trying to make sense of. And then there is diagnostic data, and then there is other data, right, which comes in. How are you building the model, and where do you see each of these? Because some companies have gone in from the wearable route, right? Some companies have gone in from the diagnostic route, right? And some companies are just pulling data to trying to make some intelligent guesswork.
I think really it's about bringing all of that together, right? For us, we actually have a health coach who's actually taking them through the translation between what happens in the diagnostics all the way into the wearable threshold if they have it. And I think here's where we have to be sensitive, right? Not everybody will have wearable data. And that's absolutely fine. And that's when you need to get like data from their qualitative lifestyle, ask them questions, you know. And that itself is actually very interesting data, because even a questionnaire, and especially when you make people think about what is actually happening, they're well aware of many of the situations. But I mean, that's a feeling. And if you translate a feeling, it actually comes from a biochemical, neurological, you know, beginning, right? It's actually got an emotive quality that can be biologically, neurologically deciphered as well, right? And I think that's the thing. To be a health coach, I think you have to be an artist, because you have to be able to look at the science, but apply it to a person.
Wow. There's a red screen and a bell. Rajiv, anything before we?
Yeah. Just quickly, you know, the fact that the two, I mean, from an entrepreneurship angle as well, the two most common, biggest drivers of disease today is metabolic dysregulation and chronic inflammation, what we call in Ayurveda as Agni Vaishamyam and Amatva, which has been told millennia back. And this leads to disease as a whole. And why I want to bring this point, data that we collect today about biomarkers are lag indicators of the disease itself. So by the time I look at the biomarkers and say something has happened, the damage is already done. So if I'm shown to be diabetic today, 7 years, 8 years in advance, I am already having my insulin resistance peak, which most people are not aware. Why I'm bringing this up, Ayurveda gives you patient-reported data, which is interpretable, informed in terms of risk prediction, in terms of digital therapeutics, the whole works, so that you're able to use patient or individual reported data. You empower the patient to report, and that leads to health therapeutics also to be designed.
Wonderful. Do we have time for questions? Professor Saini? No time. Do we have time for comment from him? Yeah.
I think it's a fantastic discussion, and I really enjoyed the discussion. But I think the main key feature which all of us here are talking about is, you know, it starts with a great data collection, which is what Rajiv has been talking about. And the data is actually what Shiva has been talking about. The data allows you to detect what you need to look for. The detection leads to fixing, and fixing leads to next step of detection, that how good the fixing has been. And that hasn't been the holy grail of medicine. That's what we've been doing, right? Collect information, detect what's wrong, fix it, and repeat the cycle. And I think this part is what the potential for entrepreneurs lies there. What is entrepreneur? We are trying to look for something which is safe, simple, scalable, sensitive, and specific. Ultimately, that bottom line lies on our ability to detect what's wrong in our body, right? Whether we do it through collecting a lot of data, questionnaire, and do a systematic analysis, or we believe if you want to democratize something, make it scalable, that I can deploy certain simple tests at primary healthcare facility, and then use that call to make clinical decisions. Ultimately, that would be the win. So that knowledge, I mean, I suppose what you deploy in your questionnaire, which is very rich, as you said, but I will ask that question as how easy it is to deploy that questionnaire for everybody. Somebody has to be learned in that art. It's not something I can do that. I see a lot of people misinterpret their blood glucometer readings also. I remember my uncle who's looked at H and said my glucometer is not working well. It actually, H means very high. It is more than 550. So that kind of fallacies does exist. Can we develop from an entrepreneur's angle scalable tools, which are safe, sensitive, specific, and definitely gives me a simplified read of my health? And that would be win for everyone.
I would add the point, and you know the work we are doing on cell and gene therapies is it'll be personalized treatment at hyperscale. So the future will be personalized. The whole mass approach is going to go. Thank you for such a wonderful discussion.